The relentless rhythm of the ship was, for the most part, a familiar torment. Days bled into weeks, each one a stark repetition of labor, salt, and the unending horizon. Tar-stained hands hauled ropes, sweat-slicked backs bent to the pump, and the air perpetually tasted of brine and the subtle underlying rot of damp wood. Yet, even in this grueling monotony, there existed a silent language the ocean spoke, a series of whispers that only the truly experienced could understand. And on this particular morning, a different kind of murmur was in the air, a subtle shift that prickled at the skin. The sky, usually a vast, indifferent blue or a predictable tapestry of clouds, had begun to tell a new story. Far off, on the western rim of the world, where the sun had just climbed, unusual formations gathered. Towering, anvil-headed giants that seemed to boil up from the deep. They weren't the common squalls that came and went with an afternoon's bluster. These were darker, denser, bruised with a color that spoke of hidden violence. The wind, typically a steady, predictable companion, began to play tricks. It would lull to an unnerving stillness, then gust from an unexpected quarter, rustling the canvas with an irritable flick, only to die away again, leaving an oppressive, heavy silence in its wake. The ship, a sturdy merchantman now repurposed by a desperate crew, began to react. Her habitual, comforting roll became a longer, more ponderous swell, as if she were breathing deeper, slower, against an invisible resistance. Down among the crew, this atmospheric shift registered not in shouted alarms, but in a tightening of jaws, a slowing of movements. Old hands. Men who had seen the bottom of the sea more times than they cared to count, cast uneasy glances towards the ominous western sky. Their usual boisterous jokes fell silent, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent vigilance. The captain, a man whose face was etched with 1,000 suns and countless storms, moved among them, his gaze sharp, assessing. He didn't need to shout. A shared, unspoken understanding passed between them. Orders were given, quietly, almost ritually. Top gallants were lowered and furled, loose spars lashed down with extra care, deadlights secured over glass ports. The ship was being battened, tightened, prepared not for a skirmish, but for something far grander and more terrifying. The vast, empty expanse of ocean, which had seemed merely indifferent for so long, now felt watchful, almost predatory. The familiar swell, the endless horizon, suddenly conveyed an immense, untamed power. Out here, beyond the comforting reach of land, they were no more than a speck of wood and desperate flesh, an insect adrift on an immense, unpredictable surface, utterly at its mercy. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation, the distant clouds now visibly swelling, spreading their dark menace across the heavens. The sky darkens further. The wind howls a new guttural song, and the first true assault begins. No gradual escalation, no slow build, but a sudden, violent lunge from the very fabric of the world. The shift was absolute, instantaneous. One moment, a mere squall threatening. The next, an enraged beast unleashed. Sheets of rain, no longer mere drops, but solid, blinding walls of water descended from the black heavens. They struck the deck with the force of thrown gravel, hammering, deafening, instantly reducing visibility to mere feet. The world beyond the ship's rail vanished, swallowed by a gray, churning maelstrom. And then the wind. It shrieked, a high, piercing keen that tore at the ears, a predatory sound that promised destruction. It was no longer a breeze, but a tangible physical force, ripping at anything exposed. The heavy, tarred canvas of the remaining sails, only moments before taut and powerful, now flapped and groaned under the strain, threads snapping with sharp reports, the fabric threatening to explode into tattered ribbons.
Before the crew could even fully comprehend the suddenness of the onslaught, the waves arrived. Not the long, deep swells of yesterday, but gargantuan, monstrous, liquid mountains rising from the churning chaos with astonishing speed. They slammed into the ship's hull with the impact of a battering ram, a concussive blow that vibrated through every plank, every bone. Water exploded upwards, not in spray, but in blinding, chilling deluges that swept across the entire deck, soaking every man to the bone, filling mouths with bitter salt, snatching breath from lungs.
The ship, once a sturdy vessel, became a mere toy in the grip of this oceanic titan. It pitched and rolled with sickening violence, its mast scraping arcs against the tempestuous sky, timbers groaning in protest, a symphony of stressed wood and metal that spoke of imminent failure. Every lurch was a new assault on balance, every crash a fresh blow to morale. On deck, a desperate frenzy erupted. Shouts were snatched away by the wind, commands conveyed more by frantic gestures and the raw terror in a man's eyes.
Figures, already soaked and shivering, scrambled like desperate ants, hands raw from hauling, muscles screaming. They fought the monstrous sails, reefing them down, wrestling the defiant canvas into submission, struggling against the very air itself. Anything loose, any spar, any bucket, any tool that had not been perfectly secured became a deadly projectile, skittering across the deck, propelled by the ship's violent movements. Men clawed at ropes, lashed themselves to rigging, gripping anything solid, their knuckles white, their faces grim.
The immediate danger was everywhere. The possibility of a heavy wave sweeping them overboard into the churning abyss, or a snapping spar crushing them instantly, or the deck itself opening up beneath their feet. Every man tasted not just the salt and the rain, but the metallic tang of fear, a choking sensation that tightened the throat, leaving them gasping, even as their lungs fought for air in the spray-filled darkness. It was a battle not just against the elements, but against the very instinct to despair, to give up in the face of such overwhelming, indiscriminate fury.
The hurricane's full, indiscriminate fury raged on deck, a maelstrom of wind and water. But for those below, huddled in the cramped, perpetually dim recesses of the ship, the storm manifested as a different, perhaps even more insidious terror. Here, the immediate visual chaos was replaced by a sensory deprivation that heightened every other input. It began with the sound, not the wind's shriek, but a symphony of internal anguish, the ceaseless, deafening concert of the ship itself. Timbers groaned, not with a steady creak, but with sharp, agonizing shrieks, like a tortured beast. Bulkheads screamed under immense pressure, a sound that seemed to tear through bone, a relentless, splintering chorus echoing the violence outside. Each lurch, each sickening drop into a trough between waves was accompanied by a new, desperate cry from the ship's very skeleton. Beneath this symphony of torment was the constant, insidious slosh and rush of water. Not just the spray that found its way through every crack and seam, but the deeper, more ominous sound of the bilge. Water, black and foul, rising and falling with every violent roll, sometimes washing across the lowest decks, carrying with it the stench of forgotten refuse, stale air, and fierce sweat. The air was thick, heavy, and perpetually damp. Breathing felt like drawing in cold, wet cloth. In this oppressive confinement, the sense of being enclosed became a torment. Men lay or sat wherever they could, lashed to a bunk or wedged into a corner, unable to see the titanic waves, unable to gauge the true height of the masts swaying or the force of the wind. Their imagination, however, filled the void with horrors far worse than sight could ever convey. Every shudder of the hull, every explosive crash of water against the planks above was amplified in their minds, transforming into the sound of the ship giving way, breaking apart around them. Sleep was a mockery. Even exhausted to the point of collapse, the violent, unpredictable lurches would hurl a man from his slumber, slamming him against a bulkhead or the opposite side of his bunk. The ceaseless noise made coherent thought difficult, let alone rest. Bodies ached from the constant bracing, muscles strained from trying to resist the ship's brutal whims. But the deepest weariness was in the spirit. To be trapped, entirely at the mercy of an unseen, all-powerful force, unable to fight back, unable to even comprehend the true scale of the battle being waged just inches above their heads, was a unique form of psychological torture. Each groan of timber, each crack from unseen stress points became a prophecy of doom, a whisper that the next impact might be the one that ripped the vessel apart, consigning them all to the icy, crushing depths. They were entombed within a wooden shell, riding a watery roller coaster towards an unknown fate. Every man a prisoner within a prison that was slowly, agonizingly being torn apart by the very elements it was meant to conquer. For hours, the ship had been a crucible, its timbers shrieking a constant protest against the ocean's relentless battering. Below, the terror was internal, a claustrophobic dance with unseen destruction. But on deck, the battle was visceral, raw, and now it escalated beyond all prior comprehension. Then,
a sound that sliced through the cacophony. Not the shriek of wind, nor the crash of a wave, but a deep, resonant, tearing crack that reverberated through every plank, every bone. A sound of finality. A tremor ran through the vessel, a sickening lurch as something immense gave way, the ship momentarily losing its equilibrium, staggering like a wounded beast. From the maelstrom above, the mainmast, a mighty tree that had stood sentinel over countless horizons, buckled. With a thunderous groan, it snapped, not cleanly, but with a tearing, splintering violence, sending jagged shards of timber flying like javelins.
A torrent of tangled rigging, heavy sails and ropes, now a death trap of whipping lines and canvas, cascaded down onto the deck. It was an explosion of destruction, a sudden, horrifying escalation of the storm's intent, a direct assault on the very spine of their vessel. Men, already pushed to the brink of exhaustion, were thrown off their feet, some narrowly escaping the crushing blow of falling debris. The ship, suddenly shorn of its vital support, wallowed dangerously in the troughs, each colossal wave threatening to swamp it entirely.
A desperate cry went up. Cut away! Cut away the wreckage! Adrenaline, a bitter metallic taste in their mouths, surged through their veins, momentarily overriding the bone-deep fatigue. Axes swung wildly, desperately trying to sever the ropes that now threatened to drag the broken mast and perhaps the entire ship down into the churning abyss. Hands, raw and bleeding, hacked at stiff, salt-encrusted lines, while others scrambled to secure anything still attached, lest more debris be lost or cause further damage. But the blows were coming from every angle.
Below decks, the violent lurching and the stress of the mast's loss had opened new seams in the hull. The desperate call came up. "Leak in the aft hold! She's taking water fast!" The rhythm of the pumps, already a constant, straining effort, became a frantic, desperate beat, a drum solo of doom. Men, some barely able to stand, formed human chains, passing buckets hand to hand from the darkening, rising water in the bilge, up the ladders to be flung overboard. Every splash of icy water, every desperate heave of a pump handle was a battle against the inevitable. Their breath hitched, their lungs burned, their muscles screamed, but they dared not stop. To pause was to perish. In their eyes, a grim, terrifying resolve mingled with profound despair. They were not just fighting the storm now. They were fighting the death of their vessel, a death that would drag them with it. Each impact of a wave against the compromised hull, each groan of a stressed timber, felt like a blow to their own fading hope. The ship was a living thing, and it was dying beneath their feet. The decision to cut away the mast, to abandon the chance of sail in favor of saving the hull, was agonizing. The choice between one desperate gamble and another. Every command shouted above the gale, every swing of an axe, every bucket of water passed, carried the crushing weight of life and death for every soul aboard. This was the moment of truth, where the raw animal will to survive
confronted the ocean's utter indifference, where the frail craft of human ingenuity faced the ultimate test against an overwhelming force determined to consume it whole.
Then, as gradually as the storm had risen, its fury began to ebb. It wasn't a sudden cessation, but a slow, almost agonizing retreat. The wind, which had shrieked for days with the voice of 1,000 devils, slowly lessened its howl, softening to a guttural moan, then a weary sigh. The monstrous waves, once towering walls of brine, diminished their height, while the ship still rose and fell on swells that felt like the planet itself breathing heavily. A heavy, bruised silence began to assert itself, broken only by the sloshing of water below decks and the creak of damaged timbers.
As the first weak, watery light of dawn struggled to pierce the overcast sky, it painted a desolate picture. Where once there were proud, taut sails, now hung shredded ribbons of canvas, tattered flags of surrender. The rigging, a precise spider web of ropes and lines, was a tangled, chaotic mess, some ends whipping freely, others taut with an ominous, unhealthy strain. Splintered railings jutted from the deck like broken teeth, and everywhere lay the detritus of battle. Snapped spars, dislodged crates, the personal effects of men swept away.
The deck itself was a slick, treacherous expanse, crisscrossed with fissures and stained with salt and the dark, deep damp that seeped into everything. From the sodden shadows, figures began to stir. Exhausted, salt-crusted specters, their faces etched with the lines of terror and sleepless nights, moved with a slow, deliberate weariness. They were not men, but automatons, their every movement a profound effort. There was a grim, silent assessment of the damage, a choreography of brokenness. The air itself felt thick with unspoken questions, with the heavy weight of what they had endured. Hands, raw and bleeding, probed at damaged planks, tested the tension of remaining ropes. Then came the grim tally. Whispers exchanged, heads shaken, the quiet, heartbreaking realization of those missing. Overboard, smashed, gone. The sea, in its indifferent passing, had claimed its share. The discovery of injuries followed. Broken limbs, deep gashes, the bone-deep chill that heralded fever. No one spoke of it in grand terms, only in the stark, practical truth of survival. A fragile, almost disbelieving relief began to wash over the survivors. It was not joy, not even happiness, but the hollow cessation of absolute terror. Yet it was mixed with profound grief, a bitter taste in the mouth as they gazed upon their broken vessel, a testament to nature's brutal indifference. The taste of fatigue was absolute, a heavy, cloying presence that dulled every sense. The sting of salt was everywhere, in their eyes, on their lips, ingrained in their very skin. This was the taste of a desperate,
bitter victory. A survival bought at an immense, agonizing price. The immediate threat is gone, yes, but the storm leaves behind a ravaged ship and weary souls, now facing a new, arduous battle against the sea and against their own dwindling resources. The immediate threat was gone, yes, but the storm left behind a ravaged ship and weary souls, now facing a new, arduous battle against the sea and against their own dwindling resources. The days and weeks that followed became a new, grinding hell. Every hour was dominated by constant, back-breaking repair work. Men moved like specters, their muscles screaming as they struggled to jerry-rig a rudimentary mast from what shattered timbers remained, or patched gaping holes in the hull with desperate, frantic ingenuity. The rhythmic clang of the pumps continued, endlessly bailing the insidious water that still sloshed in the bilge, a cold, persistent enemy. Rations, already meager before the tempest, now had to be stretched further, each mouthful a grudging concession to a body relentlessly demanding more. The pervasive damp never left. It soaked their clothes, seeped into their very bones, and fostered the relentless itch of saltwater sores and the faint, sweet, sour scent of rot.
Beyond the physical toll, the psychological impact was profound. Lingering fear clung to them like the stench of mildew, manifesting in sudden, waking nightmares where the ship still pitched violently, or the wind shrieked through their sleep. For some, shared terror forged a new, hardened solidarity, quiet understanding etched into their weary eyes. For others, it was the quiet despair of broken spirits, a profound emptiness that dimmed their gaze and slowed their steps. All harbored a new visceral respect for the ocean's raw, indifferent power, a primal understanding that transcended mere awe.
Every creak of the damaged ship, every subtle shift in the wind carried the ghost of the storm, a chilling echo that kept their nerves taut. The ordeal left an indelible mark, a constant, gnawing reminder that beyond the horizon, nature's indifference was the ultimate adversary. A force that cared nothing for human lives or their desperate struggles. The vast, empty sea continued to hold its secrets and its threats, an omnipresent force surrounding their broken, precarious world. This struggle for survival, etched into every plank and every memory, defines the pirate's true life beyond the horizon, forever at the mercy of a world that offers no quarter.